was the summer of 2020, and Nora had just arrived in Europe for the first time. She was filled with excitement as she traveled between cities, eager to take in all the sights and sounds of the continent. After a few weeks of staying in pricey hotels, she heard about a hostel from a friend located in a remote section of the countryside. She decided to book a room there, thinking it would be a great way to save some money. When Nora arrived at the hostel, she was struck by an eerie atmosphere. The building was large and cold, and she felt a chill run through her body as she walked in the door. The walls were covered in dark paint, and the lights were dim and flickering. The only sound was the wind, howling through the creaky old windows. Nora made her way to the front desk, where she was welcomed by a sinister-looking woman. She had a deep, raspy voice and seemed to be sizing Nora up with her eyes. The woman informed her that her room was up the stairs and to the left. Nora thanked her and made her way up. When Nora arrived at her room, she was surprised to find that it was huge. It was much larger than the other hostel rooms she had stayed in. She was also surprised to find it in such immaculate condition. Everything seemed brand new, from the furniture to the bedding. After settling in, Nora decided to take a look around the hostel. She stepped into the hallway and gasped. The hallway stretched out much further than she had anticipated. It seemed like it went on forever. She slowly began to make her way down, taking in the sights and sounds around her. As she made her way further down, she realized that the hallway opened up into a massive room. It was filled with rows and rows of doors, each one numbered. Nora furrowed her eyebrows in confusion. What kind of hostel was this? She counted the doors and realized that there were hundreds of them. This was no ordinary hostel. It seemed to be some kind of prison. Suddenly, Nora heard voices coming from the end of the hallway. She crouched down and made her way towards the voices. When she peeked around the corner, she froze in terror. She realized that this hostel was some kind of supernatural prison, and the voices she heard belonged to the captives within. She quickly retreated from the scene and ran back to her room, where she locked the door and stayed until morning. When Nora checked out in the morning, she was relieved to be leaving. As she made her way back home, she felt a chill run through her body, and for some reason, she couldn't get this strange place out of her mind. Days turned into weeks, and Nora tried to put the experience behind her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She began having nightmares about the hostel, and the voices she heard echoed in her head. She knew she had to find out more about this place. Nora spent countless hours researching the hostel, but she couldn't find anything. It was as if it didn't exist. That is, until she stumbled upon an old newspaper article from the 1920s. The article described a hostel that was used as a prison during the war. The prisoners were kept in small cells and were often tortured for information. The article went on to describe how the prisoners eventually were freed, but the hostel was never used again. Nora was shocked by what she had read. She couldn't believe the hostel that she had stayed in was the same one from the article. She felt sick to her stomach thinking about the torture and suffering that had taken place there. She knew she had to go back to the hostel and find out more. When Nora arrived at the hostel for the second time, she was determined to find out what happened to the prisoners. She made her way down the long hallway, past the row of doors, and towards the end where the voices had come from. She took a deep breath and opened one of the doors. Inside, she found a room filled with old furniture and dusty artifacts. She rummaged through the boxes, looking for any clues about what had happened to the prisoners. That's when she found it, a stack of old journals hidden away in a corner. The journals belonged to one of the prisoners, and they detailed the horrors he had endured while he was held captive. As Nora read through the journals, tears filled her eyes. The prisoner had been tortured for months, forced to endure unimaginable pain and suffering. But what struck Nora the most was the prisoner's resilience. Even in the face of such horrors, he refused to give up hope. He wrote about his dreams of freedom and of a life beyond the hostel's walls. Nora knew that she had to do something to honor the prisoner's memory. She decided to donate the journals to a museum where they would be preserved for future generations. She also wrote a book about her experience at the hostel and the prisoner's story, hoping to bring awareness to the atrocities that had taken place there. As Nora left the hostel for the final time, she felt a sense of closure. She knew that she had done something good, something that would make a difference. She also knew that she would never forget the horrors that had taken place within those walls, but she hoped that by sharing the prisoner's story, she could ensure that no one else would ever have to endure what he did. I had arrived late at night, and I was the only one in the hostel. The old building creaked as I walked down the corridor, as if it was trying to tell me to leave. The only light that shone was a dim one at the end of the corridor, so I made my way towards it. When I got there, I saw a woman in her late 30s sitting in a rocking chair. Her face was pale and her eyes were empty, as if she didn't belong in the world anymore. Her long gray hair hung over her shoulders, and she wore a tattered dress. She looked up at me with a knowing gaze, as if she knew exactly who I was. I opened my mouth to ask her name, but no words came out. I was frozen in fear and couldn't move. I couldn't even make a sound. Finally, I found my voice and asked her, "What are you doing here?" She started to rock back and forth, her eyes never leaving mine. "I'm here to protect you. I have been here for a long time, since the hostel was first built. There are dark forces within these walls, and I am the only thing standing between them and the unwary travelers." I didn't believe her at first, but as I looked around the room, I began to notice strange sounds and a cold chill in the air. I started to back away, but the woman beckoned me with a cold, graying finger. She smiled at me, her eyes still as empty as ever. "Stay here tonight, and I will show you my secrets," she said. I could feel my heart jump just as she spoke. I had heard of ghost stories before, but never anything like this. I wanted to turn and run, but something kept me rooted in place. The woman continued to rock in her chair as she told me her story. She said that the hostel was built upon an ancient burial ground, and that the spirits of the dead had come to haunt the living. I was told that if I stayed too long, they would come and take me away to their underworld. I was also warned that I should never look into a mirror here, for if I did, the spirits would take my reflection as their own. I was filled with terror, but I could not deny my curiosity. I decided to stay the night, and although I wish I hadn't, I found myself drawn to the woman's tales. Throughout the night, I heard strange noises and felt a chill run through me every time I heard them. I was also sure that I saw people out of the corner of my eye, only to have them disappear as quickly as they had appeared. By the time morning came, I was exhausted and relieved to see the sun rising. I quickly packed my things and went downstairs to check out. After checking out, I stopped to look in the body mirror by the doorway to ensure my attire was fitted correctly. As I was doing this, I remembered the woman's tales from last night, to never look in the mirrors here. After staring for a couple of seconds, I realized that I couldn't move. I heard the woman's chair stop rocking, and she began to limp up behind me with her eyes closed. She uttered the words, "I told you not to look in the mirrors." And as she said that, my point of view changed from looking into the mirror to looking out of the mirror. I could see the woman standing there with her eyes closed, and all she did was shake her head and say, "Another one bites the dust." As I started to look around from inside the mirror, I could see others who had been trapped here. It's almost as if there was another world inside of the mirror. After a while, it dawned on me that I would not be getting out of here anytime soon. It's now been approximately 50 years, and I'm still here, although I'm now starting to lose track of time, and I'm starting to lose hope that I'll ever get out of here. I was traveling around Europe, seeing all kinds of different places. I had seen some really incredible things, but nothing could have prepared me for what I would experience when I booked a room in a local hostel. The room was small, but it was clean and comfortable, and I thought nothing of it. I settled in and made myself comfortable, but something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something just felt wrong. I relaxed on my bunk for a while, watching YouTube videos from the channel Matrix of Dreams. The horror stories that I listened to there had me slightly frightened. So to ease my mind, I decided to take a shower. After a steamy, warm shower, I stepped out and I noticed something strange. There were 3 small holes in the wall, almost like someone had been drilling them. I immediately felt a sense of dread, and I knew something was off. I quickly got dressed and went to the receptionist to ask if there had been any maintenance work done recently. The reception was very nice and polite, but also seemed nervous, as she told me that there had been no work done in the room. So I thanked her and quickly returned back to my room. Once I was back in my room, I searched every inch of it, looking for any clues as to what was going on. After a few minutes of searching, I found something. It was a small camera, hidden in the corner of the room behind some books. I knew that it had to have been placed there on purpose because it was a very hard to spot place. My heart started racing as I realized what had happened. Someone had been secretly filming me while I was in the shower. I had no idea who it could be or why they were doing this, but I was terrified. I quickly packed my things and prepared to leave the hostel. On my way out, I could see the receptionist looking at me with all my bags in hand. I didn't dare make contact with her nor any of the workers there, as I now believed they were all perverts. I knew I had to find out who was doing this and why, and I knew I couldn't do it alone. I called the police and reported what had happened. After a few hours of intense questioning, the police returned to the hostel to search it. They told me that they had found several more hidden cameras in my room, hidden in various places like behind the curtains, in the vents, and even inside the bed frame with audio. It was clear that someone had been watching me in the room, but I had no idea why or who. The police didn't have any leads, but they promised to do their best to find out who was responsible. I was relieved that they were taking this matter seriously, but I was still scared. I had no idea who had been watching those cameras, and I felt completely violated at this point. I had become a prisoner in my own life, and I was never able to shake the feeling that someone was always watching me. Everywhere I went, I was constantly on edge, always looking over my shoulder, trying to make sure that no one was watching me. I was struggling to trust anyone, and I was losing myself in the process. I was never able to find out who was watching and why, but I still felt violated. I had to take extra precautions and be extra vigilant, but I was always scared that someone was still out there, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I can never go back to that or any hostel again. No matter how much I want to, I'm too scared of what might happen if I do. Till this day, whenever I stay at a hotel, I check the room vigorously for cameras and other devices. Like my mom says, better safe than sorry. It was my first time in Amsterdam, and I was feeling both anxious and excited. I had been planning for this trip for months, and now that I was finally here, I was ready to explore the city and all it had to offer. Little did I know that my adventure in Amsterdam would take a dark turn. After a few days of sightseeing, I decided to find a place to stay for the night. I found a cheap hostel that looked promising, so I booked a room and headed over there. When I arrived, I was greeted by a friendly receptionist who showed me to my room. The room looked nice enough, but something about the hostel gave me a strange feeling. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like I was being watched. I tried to ignore the feeling and get some rest, but as the night went on, I could feel an ever-growing sense of dread. I kept hearing strange noises coming from the hallways, and I could have sworn I saw something move in the corner of my eye. I kept the lights on and stayed up all night, too scared to move. I was sure I was being watched, but by who or what, I couldn't be sure. Just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, I heard a loud bang coming from outside my room. I was jolted awake and my heart raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I slowly opened the door and peered out into the hallway, only to discover a figure lurking in the shadows. Startled, I slammed the door shut and backed away, my heart pounding in my ears. I knew I had to get out of the hostel as soon as possible. I grabbed my things and headed for the door, but as I reached for the handle, I felt a hand grab my shoulder from behind. I froze in fear as the figure in the shadows stepped into the light. It was a receptionist from earlier. She had a sinister look in her eyes, and she told me, "You can't leave now. Your story has just begun." She then revealed to me her true identity. She was a powerful witch who had been living in the hostel for centuries, controlling the supernatural activity that was occurring. She had been watching me since I arrived, and she was determined to keep me in the hostel, trapped forever in her horror story. I was too scared to move, and I felt my heart sink into my stomach. I knew I was in trouble. I was trapped in a horror story, and I had no idea how it would end. I was trembling with fear as I heard the receptionist's voice echoing in my head. Suddenly, the door to the hostel flew open, and the receptionist vanished without a trace. Standing in the doorway was a man, the police chief of Amsterdam. He had come to investigate the strange occurrences at the hostel. The police chief explained to me that the hostel was known for its supernatural activity and that I had narrowly escaped with my life. Countless others had been missing from this hostel after they checked in and never checked out. He promised to investigate further and to look into the receptionist's background, as well as the strange supernatural activity taking place in the hostel. The officer escorted me out, and I was relieved to be out of the hostel and safely back in the city. I had survived my own horror story, and I was grateful for the help of the police chief. As I walked away, I vowed to never stay in a hostel in Amsterdam again.